Hello viewers, my name is Dr. Shahid and today we have here Dr. Asif Zadi with us. He is adjunct faculty at University of Waterloo in Canada and he has been doing research in laser physics. And today we have invited him to give us an overview of 20th century physics and basics of new thinking. So welcome Dr. Zadi.
Thank you. As we want to talk about what happened basically in 1900s or years around it, we will just talk in a simple way so that most of you can understand. Actually, those who are interested in science, for them, this might be interesting. And what we want to start with is some very basic ideas, which most of you have done in high school physics, one way or another. Most engineering, medical, and science students know this. Let's see if, okay, like very basic in physics is we measure things, right? And after measurement, uh, of course, uh, you are sure that what you're doing. Like very simple thing is, if anybody goes to find a curtain for his window, he will go to the curtain seller and will say, give me a curtain. Now, if he says that, what the seller is going to say, he will ask, what is the width of your window? What is the length of your window? And if you just say, give me a curtain, he will of course smile if he is very polite. So actually you need to know length and width if you want to go and buy a curtain. So measurement is really essential. When you want to do something, you want to make a room, you need to measure what size of room you want, what should be the width, what should be the length. Or in fact, when you go to purchase a house, you do all this. How big are the rooms? So very basic thing is measurement. Now, when you move anything from point A to point B, it may be moving car, running man, or whatever, then you measure the distance. And of course, you measure the time. You know, what time you reach from A to B. Well, basically, measurement is done from some reference. So we say that, okay, we have coordinate system, and from where we will measure. At the center is 0, 0. So from point A to B, there is some distance, which distance is covered in some time. There is no way to go from A to B in 0 time. You have to spend some time there. So this measurement you can do with a simple equation, considering that you have been moving with a constant speed v, then distance covered will be x is equal to vt, right? I'm not considering any acceleration or other kind of thing, just be very simple. It is a constant velocity motion. So we can consider some things which are important. So x is equal to vt is the equation. If v is very fast, you can cover distance x in a small time. Okay, very basic. Now, light is the fastest signal we have. Okay, so for light in free space, velocity is constant. That is, we call c, and c is 3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. So for free space, equation becomes x is equal to ct. Now, if you use this equation, you will find that light travels in 1 meter in 3.33 nanosecond. That is very fast. That's why when you are sitting on computer and pressing button, you immediately see that whatever you are asking, it is coming to you, because far away distances are covered in very, very short time by light. And a computer signal is modulated on light signal. So it travels with speed of light. So also, suppose you get lost in desert, what you do? The most intelligent thing is you just burn some wood so that light will go away, and if somebody wants to find you, they can find you. So light is the fastest signal, and its equation is very simple: x is equal to vt. There are other motions, accelerated motion and others, but uh, I mean, that also can be dealt with the equation, but let us keep with this simple x is equal to vt. Now, next question is what we want to do with physics, only measuring how fast somebody is moving or whatever. Actually, physics comes with a natural question, and the natural question is what we are made up of, what this world is made up of, and how we can explain phenomenon which is natural or which is artificial, like man-made. So all this physics takes tries to understand, especially the natural phenomena like northern lights and why earthquakes and many other things. So physics tries to explain what we see in nature or what is in heavens, why there are some stars and how they shine and whatever. So what physics does, physics uses experiment and physics uses mathematics. So those who do more theory and mathematics, they make mathematical models, and experimentalists basically test those models. Sometimes what happens is experimentalists are ahead, sometimes theorists are ahead. And how do we know how we can match these two things? We match, suppose a theorist produces some number. Now, an experimentalist, when he does the experiment, if he produces also numbers, his numbers and the theorist number must match within limit of uncertainty. If numbers are way off, either theorist is wrong or experimental is wrong. So this is one of the key things. Actually, this thing is in most of the sciences. But in physics, since physics, we really care about accurate measurements. So in physical theories, of course, we want to measure what theorist is saying by in good check with the experiment. So this is how.
What was the limit of uncertainty, by the way?
Well, limit of uncertainty means, suppose you measure some quantity. Suppose you are measuring a length of something by a meter stick, right? So meter stick has minimum division of 1 millimeter. Okay, so anything you measure has a error of plus minus 0.05 centimeter. So that is the limit in a simple way. Every experiments are more complicated, so you have to carefully calculate what can be error in a certain measurement. So what I want to say is, whatever theory produces, it is tested by experiments. And you see, theory produces a numbers, experiment produces a numbers about certain phenomena. When their numbers match within the limit of uncertainty, then we say theory and experiment converge. And theoretical foundation, theory is not questioned. It is accepted that it is verified by experiment. But if divergence of number is more than 20%, then of course it is not right. So this is how it works. So Dr. Shai, do you want some?
Yeah, we can continue.
Okay. So, well, you see, I want to go towards the situation what was in early 1900s. In early 1900s, we had Newtonian mechanics, which was well established. By Newtonian mechanics, we can do many things. Like if you throw a ball, how far it will go, what speed it will have, or you collide two billiard balls, what will happen. And if you throw a projectile, how far it will go, at what angle you should throw, or all these kind of things you can do by Newtonian mechanics, how rocket goes up and it comes down. I mean, anything falling. So all you can do, a simple example of Newtonian thing I can show you is, let us see this. This is a kind of experiment Galileo did. You know, in his time, it was known that people used to think heavy things falls first and lighter things fall later. This is what Aristotle also thought, and people used to think. And when Galileo told to people, nobody believed him. They say, "Oh no, you know, feather. This is a feather and a gold coin." So he said, "No, both things should fall at the same time because they are pulled by Earth's gravity at the same time." But when people didn't accept, then he showed these two things. This tube has air in it, and he drops feather and hammer. Oh, sorry, not hammer. Feather and gold coin together. You see, gold coin is falling fast and feather is falling slowly. This everybody sees. This is a normal observation that small things will fall. Small mass will fall not so quickly. So it is behind and it is falling fast because gold is heavier. So it is falling. So this is what people used to think. But then what he did, he took air out completely. And when he drops the gold coin and feather, then they both fall exactly at the same time. I mean, now it is very clear. If somebody wants to see, they can see on internet feather and hammer experiment on moon. The astronaut drops feather and hammer together at same time, and they both reach the ground at the same time. Why that happens? It happens because moon has no air. So this effect which happens on Earth is not there. So anybody can see there. So another thing, I mean, this is what establishes that Earth's pull, which is acceleration due to gravity, acts exactly the same 9.8 meter per second square on all the masses. Okay, so this is what Galileo established first. Now this is a small equation here. If you drop a ball from 4.9 meter above the ground, where g is 9.8 meter per second square, this is acceleration due to gravity, which is at that place. So we use this equation, distance h, height h is equal to v naught t plus half gt square. You do this when you drop, initial velocity is 0, so you get this equation. Now here you will calculate time to reach the ground. Time to reach the ground, since this is a t square here, you will see plus 1 second or minus 1 second. Logically, mathematically, you will calculate this, plus 1 second or minus 1 second. Now, physically, time t is equal to plus 1 second is a correct answer, because time starts when you drop the ball or a stone, whatever. When you drop, then you start counting the time. Then time is plus 1 second. There is no sense of time minus 1 second. So this answer is unphysical. Okay. Mathematically, both answers are correct. But physically, we take this answer t is equal to plus 1 second because, of course, this matches our expectation. Okay. So basically, mathematically, you have all possible answers. But when you are doing physics, you need to see what matches with the reality. And minus 1 second in no way, because minus 1 second means this is a time before, but you start counting time from 0. So t is equal to plus 1 second is the correct answer. So this is, I mean, of course, a little example. Now, basically, in 1900, two theories of physics were established completely, and they were experimentally verified. Newtonian theory of mechanics and Maxwellian theory of electromagnetism. And speed of light was calculated by Maxwell. Okay, so these were two very established pillars of physics around 1900. So anything we do, we thought must comply according to these two theories. And of course, let's go quickly on Newton. Newton gave 3 laws in mechanics. Okay. Now, Newtonian mechanics, first law, which is of course very important, it tells that every body will remain in a state of rest or uniform motion in a straight line unless it is compelled to change its state by an action of external force. That means if something is moving with a constant speed, it should always keep moving on constant speed. Now, if we throw a ball on earth, that doesn't happen because ball stops. So in Aristotle time, people thought ball stops because ball gets tired. You know, this funny kind of notion, everything stops because they get tired. No, it is that being tired is a human feeling. I mean, when you throw a ball, ball does not get tired or feel anything basically. So, but this was the notion before Newton. What Newton said, basically, there are two states of motion, state of rest. If I put something here on the table, it will be here today, it will be here tomorrow, it will be here after 10 years or 100 years, unless nobody touches it. Touches and pushes, that means he's applying force. So if you don't apply force, thing will stay over there, right? So this is Newton's law, basically tells whatever state of motion, whether it is rest or uniform motion, it will maintain. Now, one can say, well, I don't see that uniform. I throw a ball 10 meters per second, it stops. So Newton's law, the second portion is wrong. Rest portion, everybody understand. Well, if you go in space and throw a ball 10 meters per second, it will always continue 10 meters per second. It will not stop unless there is an external force. Suppose it goes close to the Jupiter and Jupiter takes it in, then it will change speed, but that is external force. So what he says, if there is no external force on the body, body will always continue to move with the same velocity. I mean, recently, now we live in a time when we have examples. There is a satellite which was sent many years ago, and it is now moving outside of the solar system. And it has taken pictures of all the planets almost in its path, and it is now moving with the same speed as it left the solar system, because now there is a large vacuum between our solar system and any other solar system. So it is just moving in a vacuum and it is moving with a constant speed. So Newton's first law tells that. Well, we come to the Newton's second law. Newton's second law tells net force on a body causes the acceleration which is directly proportional to the net force is directly proportional to the acceleration, right? If I keep mass constant, I can say F is equal to ma. Okay, so these are the this is the very important law which has applications in many things and all motions and whatever. Well, third law basically tells you action and reaction are equal and opposite in direction. You can fly rockets with that. You can fly jet planes with that. And these are the kind of examples in daily life you can have. Now, mathematically, I can write second law with this equation. F is equal to md square by dt. And we define momentum is a quantity. P is equal to mass into velocity. So momentum is product of mass and velocity. This is an important quantity in physics. So if momentum, if say, okay, so now forces act on the body in the center of mass. Suppose you have a football. You kick a football, where force acts? At the center of it. Earth is moving around the sun, where force acts? At the center. So all the forces act on the center of the body, we say the center of mass. Okay, so this is maybe a simplified version of classical physics. Now, one more important aspect is in classical physics we have a particle model. Particle model means all the forces act at the center of the body. Okay. Now, when forces act on the center of the body, we think that even such a big object like Earth, we can imagine center of the Earth where force will act. So we calculate things by F is equal to ma, imagining this. So it is basically a particle model. And in mechanics, we think that, let's see this picture. Okay. I think, okay. Well, if a body goes from A to B, then we mean in mechanics, then we know position and momentum of a body at every instant. That means it is a deterministic system. At every point, I can explain position and momentum of a body. Now, Newtonian mechanics tells that, and that means if I measure position first and momentum after, then other way, if I do momentum first and position after, it doesn't matter. I should get the same answer. Okay, this is one of the conclusions of the Newtonian mechanics. So, and which remains valid when particle masses are large and their speed is much less than the speed of light. You see, speed of light is 3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. Now you consider bullet. Speed of the bullet is 500 meter per second, and bullet is about hardly 5 gram, right? But speed of the bullet is high. Now, speed of the bullet is high. What it gives, what it means, speed of the bullet is high, mass is very small, but speed multiplied by mass is a quantity which is momentum. It makes momentum high. So quality of motion you determine of some body, how fast it is moving, or what is the mass, right? Two things. I mean, if elephant is coming towards you 2 meter per second, or a very large truck with 2 meter per second, it is dangerous. You better move away, right? So big truck is dangerous, although speed is low, but big truck is dangerous because of the mass. Bullet is dangerous because of the speed. So product is important. That's why momentum is an important quantity in physics. And we have law of conservation of momentum and many things in mechanics. Okay. So basically what mechanics has, Newton's laws, law of conservation of momentum, that momentum, suppose two things are colliding, momentum before and after collision is conserved, and energy conservation law. These are the laws. So on roughly speaking, basically classical mechanics has these basic things, and from these basics you can do many things, like having a Newton's law of universal gravitation, you can calculate motion of the planets and accurately. I mean, one example of calculation and accuracy is man went to the moon, and when they went to the moon, they have calculated very precisely where moon will be when you launch from Earth, and how moon cart will separate from the Apollo and will go down there. And when it comes up again to bring these astronauts from moon to that, then all these calculations should be very, very accurate. So all this can be done with Newton's laws, law of gravitation, and all this kind of thing. So this is basically a short view of mechanics. What mechanics is and what it does, it can do many things. So let's talk about something about the scientists who were doing the work. In classical physics, well, Newton was the one in around 1550, he gave his laws, and Coulomb gave his law about electricity and magnetism, that is Coulomb's law, which was about 1600 somethings. Then 1700 Boltzmann did a lot of work using mechanics and about theory of gases. And then Maxwell, of course, did a lot of work in electromagnetic theory. I mean, Maxwell's work was the one which established theoretically speed of light. Okay. So, and it showed that the light is basically electromagnetic wave, which in free space travels with a constant speed, and that is the speed of light. Okay, this is what Maxwell showed. So, but this all work was done before 1900. Okay. So we can explain many things like light waves. We can explain many other physical phenomena like interference, diffraction on the basis of electromagnetic theory, and many other physical phenomena, how bird flies and how we can send rocket to the moon or other planets. This all was done by Newton's laws and before 1900. Now the question comes, when we can do everything, we can throw the arrow, we can shoot with the bullet, we can shoot things with the cannon or whatever, then what is the trouble? We can do almost everything. So are physicists troublemakers? Or they always think about new trouble, right? So what is wrong? I mean, what happened in 1900? Well, of course, the trouble is human curiosity. I mean, you keep doing experiments, you keep formulating mathematical theories, and what happened around 1900, people tried to explain atom. Okay? There was a Dalton's atomic theory, which said in 1800 that atom is like a very small spherical ball type of thing, which is uniform all. It has no structure. And different, like you can say carbon atom and hydrogen atom are different because their sizes are different. But they are all spherical balls with different sizes. And they do the chemical reaction and whatever. I don't want to go into that. And then this is how they explained chemistry for a long time. But of course, people question Dalton's theory. Why atom is spherical, why it is like this? Does it have a structure? Natural question is, does atom have a structure? You see what happened close to 1900, some people did experiment. Do I have this experiment here? Yeah. J.J. Thomson did an experiment, of course, in early 1900, probably, or late 1800s. What he did, he took he took a cathode, he applied high voltage. This is anode, this is cathode, and he applied a magnetic field here. Now, when you don't apply any magnetic field, you apply high voltage, and you fill some helium gas at a low pressure. What you see is some rays are coming from here with high voltage when you apply. Now, if you apply a magnetic field, you can actually control the speed. And that time magnetic control was known. So you apply electric field. Suppose you don't apply any magnetic field, you apply electric field. Suppose this is a positive plate and this is a negative plate. Now, if a beam is coming from here, if beam has a negative charge, it will go towards the positive plate. So there is this bending. So when this bending happened, then people realize these are negative charge. This is a negative charge. What is coming from here, from this plate, and it is going towards the positive plate. And if I put a positive plate here, this goes up. So J.J. Thomson's experiment. Now, then you can naturally question from where this negative comes, because atom is neutral. Atom is like a ball. So, and every material is made up of atoms. So now, if every material is made up of atoms, that means atom must be having a distribution of negative and positive charge. Suppose atom has a 5 positive charge, 5 negative charge, then yes, you are right, atom is neutral. But if it is neutral, then it must have a charge distribution, negative and positive. And how this distribution is, then this question came. Now, what J.J. Thomson's experiment shows, it is just not no charge. It has two charges, positive and negative. How they are distributed and how they are, this was the next question. But what he demonstrated, of course, there is a negative charge and there is a positive charge. And of course, we know Coulomb's law, F is equal to K Q1 Q2 divided by R square. These charges behave according to the Coulomb's law. Like charges repel, unlike charges attract. Okay, this we know from the very basic Coulomb's law. So this shows basically atom has charge distribution. Atom in general is neutral, but it has a charge distribution. Now, where positive charges live, where negative charges live, this is an initial model. Initial model meant if they are distributed like this. But the question is, Coulomb's law says if there is a positive charge and there is a negative charge, they will attract. So all these charges, if their atom is neutral, so it should have say plus 10 and minus 10. And then what stops them just coming very close together, because there is attraction and the charges should finish. So there should be no charges. So these were this type of the questions were. I mean, this was one of the question, how is the distribution? And let's see more. Okay, well, this shows how you use mechanics and you can explain solar system now. Now, of course, Coulomb's law is like this. This is a positive charge, this is positive charge, there will be repulsion. Positive, negative, there will be attraction. So it is like this. So force of attraction is K is a constant, Q1, Q2 divided by R square. And using this, you can explain how lightning happens and many other experiments you can create in the lab, which all obey the Coulomb's law. So these are some natural phenomena you can explain using before 19th century physics. Now, if we want to go, say, a little bit more in 1900s, around 1900, as I said before, yeah. Theoretically speaking, suppose I have a y-axis and x-axis and a particle moves like that on this path. So at every point, I know position, I know moment. Okay. Now that means if I take product of xp minus px, p is the momentum, x is the position. So it doesn't matter. First I measure position or momentum. It really doesn't matter. So it should give me 0. This is classical physics. And it is deterministic physics. Means it is telling me at every point 100% I can measure position and momentum. So this way, there is xp minus px will not give me anything. They will completely cancel and I will get 0. So this is classical physics. What new physics we have more, and we will go later into that, why it is that. It tells that actually xp minus px is small number, which is h, and it is called Planck's constant, which is basically 6.26 into 10 to the power minus 34 joules second. Now this number is of course too small, and it almost is like 0. So classical experiments did not detect this kind of things. So they put instead of h 0 here. And what new physics which was discovered after 1900s, they said no, it matters you measure position first or momentum first. That's why you should have actually this difference, and this difference is in terms of the Planck constant. Okay. So this is the basic difference between the classical physics and quantum mechanics. which was invented later, and this explains motions of the electrons or other charges at a scale which is very, very small. You see, classical physics range is you shoot a bullet, you can tell completely everything. Earth moving around the sun, or motion of the galaxies and other things. You can all explain by classical physics. But when you go to explain motion of the particles, when speed is very small, sorry, speed is very large and mass is very small, then classical laws do not explain things properly. Or if speed approaches to the speed of light and mass becomes as small as mass of the electron, like mass of the electron is 9.1 into 10 to the power minus 31 kg. It's very, very small. So, and if this thing moves close to the speed of light, this does not behave like a classical particle. So that's the thing. So of course, to get those observations in common daily life, you cannot observe these things. You observe these things when you do experiments which involve very fast moving particles and mass of the particle is very, very small. Then you see some things which are different. And then, of course, you go on explaining those different things. So I will just say little bit what was the hallmark of electromagnetic theory. Well, don't get bogged down by these differential equations. Of course, these are called Maxwell's equation because Maxwell, some of the equations were known before Maxwell. Maxwell put an important part. He actually completed this equation, but this was very important. So after his completion, he was able to calculate, show that c speed of light is equal to 1 over square root epsilon naught mu naught. Mu naught is a constant for free space and epsilon naught is an electrical constant for free space. So he showed speed of light is like this, which is derived from two constants. So that means this is also a constant in free space. So if you want to see calculation, you can see that you can show that this constant, and you take the square root and inverse it, you get 3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second, which is the speed of light in light. So this was a big step which Maxwell did before 1900s, and he showed that electromagnetic waves like radio waves, microwaves, gamma rays, X-rays, and ordinary light in free space, they travel with this speed. And of course, there are a lot of experiments which confirm that speed of visible light is this. But the Maxwell was the first one who showed from the theory that yes, this number can be calculated and this number is like this. So this is what gave electromagnetic theory really what I can say the great appreciation that they can explain light. So basically explaining this means that light is simply electric magnetic disturbance in free space and which travel in free space along x-axis with speed of light. Now knowing this, of course, you can do a lot of electromagnetic communication and you can these communication engineers, what they do, they take light signal and they put their own sound signal and it can travel faster, right? You can make cell phone. I mean, cell phone, of course, you cannot make in 1800 because many things, semiconductor technology is there, which was not there, but the principle, how waves will travel and you can detect them was there. Okay? So, with, of course, semiconductor industry, which was later, and electromagnetic theory combination gives you a cell phone. Of course, application of old electromagnetic theory still you can do. I mean, you can make flying trains. which is maglens, this magnetic train. This is one of the applications. Of course, a lot of technology which is used in this has come after 1900s. But of course, this is electromagnetic. This is a huge electromagnet which produces a force with this train. It lifts train about half an inch from the track and it can run frictionless. So these are magnetic trains. So electromagnetic theory and now you can say that mechanics, both are really very successful. But we can go to the future further experiments like J.J. Thomson's experiment. Uh, what are the things we had to question uh, uh, why do we question physics of 1900s, before 1900s? Okay, what 1900 physics gave us? Position and momentum of a particle can be measured in any order. Right? So either I measure position first or momentum first, doesn't matter. Okay, no limit for particle speed. In classical mechanics, a particle can move with speed of light, faster than speed of light, less than speed of light, whatever. There is no limit. So also what classical physics give you, electromagnetic waves move in free space with the speed of light. Okay, so light speed was calculated theoretically, and in free space they move with this speed, and radiation is absorbed and emitted in a continuous manner. Okay, this is also derived from electromagnetic. That means if sunlight is shining, so in 1 hour you put something, it will absorb some energy, right? In joules. Second hour it will absorb 1 hour plus 1 hour. So absorption and emission from the body is in a continuous manner. This is all the hallmarks of say classical physics and its best conclusion.